An adopted dog refuses to sleep unless he's beside his little girl, every single night. At first, the family thinks it's cute, until his sweet behavior turns into something dark. He growls at empty hallways. He won't eat unless he can see her door. And when he suddenly throws himself against the front door in the middle of the night, everyone realizes this isn't just a clingy pet. Something is terrifying him. When a vet examines the dog, he notices scars no one else saw. Scars that point to a past too violent to explain. And when he looks at the little girl, he freezes, then breaks down in tears. Because the dog isn't guarding her by accident. He's guarding her for a reason no one is ready to hear. What secret is this dog carrying? And what is he trying so desperately to protect her from? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The autumn wind whistled through the fence posts of the Maris Ranch, carrying with it the scent of sage and prairie grass. Holden Maris stood on his wraparound porch, weathered hands gripping the railing as he surveyed the expanse of land that stretched toward the distant mountains. The isolation of the property had always been a comfort to him, but today it felt different. Today, that isolation needed to be a shelter. His daughter was coming home. Holden's eyes tracked across the gravel driveway that wound its way through the horse pastures. Rhea would be driving up that road soon, leaving behind a life in the city that had nearly broken her spirit. His jaw tightened at the thought. A father was supposed to protect his little girl, but some hurts came from choices that were beyond his control. Inside the house, he'd spent the past week preparing. The bedroom that had remained mostly untouched since she'd left for college now had fresh linens, clean curtains, and a new cushion in the window seat where she used to read. Little touches that he hoped would say what he struggled to put into words. "Welcome home. You're safe here." But it didn't feel like enough. That's what had brought him to the county animal shelter on this crisp morning, studying the rows of hopeful faces behind chain-link doors. He wasn't usually an impulsive man. Running a ranch required planning and patience, but something about this decision felt right. "This fellow's been with us about 3 months," the shelter worker was saying, leading him to a kennel near the end. "He's older, probably around 7 or 8, but he's got a gentle soul. Previous owner couldn't keep him anymore." Holden crouched down to look at the golden retriever, who sat quietly watching him. Most of the other dogs were barking or jumping, but this one just held his gaze with deep brown eyes that seemed to hold years of understanding. His coat was a rich gold, showing hints of gray around the muzzle, and despite some visible scars, there was a dignity in how he carried himself. "What's his name?" Holden asked. "We've been calling him Bramble. He responds well to it." Bramble. It fit somehow, like the tough but protective thorns that grew wild along the ranch's fence lines. The dog tilted his head slightly, and Holden saw something in those eyes that reminded him of his daughter, a quiet resilience beneath old hurts. "I'll take him," Holden said, straightening up. "My daughter's coming home today. She could use a friend." The drive back to the ranch was quiet, with Bramble sitting calmly in the passenger seat of Holden's truck. The dog seemed to study the passing landscape with the same thoughtful attention he'd shown at the shelter. No nervous panting or restless movement, just patient observation. Holden pulled up to the house just as another vehicle appeared at the far end of the drive. His heart squeezed a little at the sight of Rhea's small sedan, loaded down with boxes and bags. He hadn't seen her in person for nearly 6 months, not since before everything fell apart with that controlling boyfriend of hers. Bramble's ears perked up as Rhea's car drew closer, but he remained seated, watching. Holden stepped out onto the gravel drive as Rhea parked. She emerged slowly, looking both smaller and older than he remembered. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her movements held a wariness that hadn't been there before. But when she saw him, a genuine smile broke through. "Dad," she said softly, and then she was in his arms, holding on tight like she had when she was little. He hugged her back carefully, noting how thin she felt. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough with emotion. When they pulled apart, he cleared his throat. "Got something for you." He opened the truck's passenger door, and Bramble stepped out with deliberate grace. The dog paused, looking up at Rhea with that same calm, steady gaze that had caught Holden's attention at the shelter. Rhea's eyes widened. "Oh," she breathed. "Dad, you didn't have to—" "Thought you might like some company while you're getting settled," Holden said, trying to keep his tone casual. "His name's Bramble. Shelter said he's good with people, quiet type." As if to demonstrate, Bramble took a few steps forward and sat down near Rhea's feet, not crowding her but making himself available. Rhea knelt down slowly, extending her hand. Bramble gently touched his nose to her fingers. "He's beautiful," she said, and Holden noticed her shoulders relaxing slightly. They spent the next hour bringing in Rhea's belongings, with Bramble following at a polite distance, always keeping Rhea in sight. The dog seemed to understand instinctively that she needed space, while also needing to know she wasn't alone. As evening approached, Holden watched from the kitchen as Rhea sat on the porch swing. Bramble settled comfortably at her feet. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a sight that had always made this isolated piece of land feel like heaven to Holden. But now he found himself watching his daughter's face, searching for signs that she felt safe here. "It's so quiet," Rhea said when he brought her a cup of tea. "I'd forgotten how quiet it gets out here." "Too quiet?" he asked, trying not to sound worried. She shook her head, running her fingers absently through Bramble's fur. "No, it's nice. Different from the city. It might take some getting used to again." Holden nodded, understanding she wasn't just talking about the silence. Coming back to small-town life after years in the city would be an adjustment. He'd seen her notice the curious glances from neighbors when they'd driven through town earlier, the way small communities never forgot their own, for better or worse. "No rush," he said simply. "Take all the time you need." As night settled over the ranch, Rhea excused herself to head to bed. Bramble rose immediately, padding after her with that same attentive calmness he'd shown all day. At the bottom of the stairs, Rhea turned back. "Dad," she said softly. "Thank you. For everything. She glanced down at Bramble, who waited patiently beside her. "For giving me a fresh start." Holden watched them climb the stairs together, Bramble matching his pace to Rhea's tired steps. Through the window, he could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, and he allowed himself to hope. Hope that his daughter would find healing in this quiet place. Hope that the gentle presence of her new companion would help her remember how to trust again. In her childhood bedroom, Rhea stood for a moment, taking in the familiar space that her father had so carefully prepared. The window seat where she'd spent countless hours reading still held the same view of the mountains. The old quilt her grandmother had made still lay folded at the foot of the bed. And now Bramble settled onto the new dog bed in the corner, his watchful eyes reflecting the warm glow of the bedside lamp. For the first time in months, Rhea felt something like peace stirring in her heart. It wasn't a dramatic change. She knew the scars of the past months wouldn't fade overnight. But as she climbed into bed and switched off the light, listening to Bramble's steady breathing in the darkness, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, calmer days lay ahead. The first signs of Bramble's unusual behavior emerged as Rhea prepared for bed that night. She'd changed into her comfortable flannel pajamas and was arranging her pillows when she noticed Bramble hadn't settled into the plush dog bed her father had placed in the corner. Instead, he stood at attention by the bedroom door, his body eerily still. "Come on, boy," Rhea called softly, patting the dog bed. "Look at this nice, cozy spot Dad got for you." Bramble's ears twitched at her voice, but his eyes remained fixed on the hallway beyond the partially open door. His posture was unnaturally rigid, more like a statue than a living creature. Rhea tried, again, this time with more authority in her voice. "Bramble, bed." She pointed firmly at the dog bed, remembering how her childhood dog had responded to direct commands. But Bramble only shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself more squarely in the doorway. His tail, which had wagged freely throughout the day, now hung motionless. Sighing, Rhea decided to let him be. "Suit yourself," she muttered, climbing into bed and switching off the lamp. The darkness felt heavy in the unfamiliar familiar room, broken only by strips of moonlight filtering through the curtains. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out Bramble's silhouette, still standing guard. After several minutes, he finally lowered himself to the floor, but not to rest. He stretched out across the gap beneath the door, his body blocking it completely. Sleep came fitfully that night. Every time Rhea drifted toward consciousness, she could hear Bramble's breathing, not the deep, steady breaths of peaceful sleep, but the alert, shallow breaths of a watchful guardian. Morning brought temporary relief. As sunlight filled the room, Bramble's strange intensity melted away. He trotted downstairs with her for breakfast, accepting gentle pets and treats with his usual calm demeanor. "How'd you two sleep?" Holden asked, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs across the kitchen counter to Rhea. "Fine," she said automatically, then hesitated. Though Bramble was kind of weird about the door, wouldn't sleep in his bed. Holden chuckled, reaching down to ruffle Bramble's ears. "Already playing bodyguard, huh? That's loyalty for you." But something in Bramble's behavior didn't feel like simple loyalty to Rhea. She'd had dogs before. They were protective, sure, but this felt different. More obsessive, more unsettling. The second night proved worse than the first. Bramble took up his position even earlier, standing alert as soon as Rhea began her bedtime routine. This time when he finally lay down, his rest was fractured. Every small noise, the house settling, a distant coyote, the wind in the trees, caused him to jerk awake, his head snapping up to scan the darkness. Around midnight, a particularly loud crack from the old heating system startled him into a low, rumbling growl. The sound sent chills down Rhea's spine, not because it was threatening, but because it seemed to be responding to something she couldn't perceive. "Bramble, stop it!" she whispered harshly. The growling ceased, but his body remained tense, vibrating with barely contained energy. By the third night, Rhea's irritation had grown into genuine concern. Dark circles had formed under her eyes from interrupted sleep, and the constant awareness of Bramble's vigilance was wearing on her nerves. She tried reasoning with him, bribing him with treats, even physically guiding him to the dog bed, but nothing worked. The moment she released him, he would return to his post. "Dad," she said over coffee the next morning, "I think something's wrong with Bramble." Holden looked up from his newspaper, frowning. "Wrong how?" "He won't sleep properly. He just guards the door all night, growling at nothing, getting up and down. I can barely rest with him acting so strange." Her father's expression softened. "Honey, he's probably just adjusting. New home, new person to look after. Give him time." But Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than adjustment. There was something almost desperate in the way Bramble maintained his watch, as if he were protecting her from some specific threat rather than simply showing general protectiveness. On the fourth night, she decided enough was enough. After getting ready for bed, she firmly closed the door, leaving Bramble in the hallway. For a moment there was silence. Then came the scratching, gentle at first, then more insistent. When she didn't respond, Bramble began to whine, a high-pitched sound that seemed to vibrate through the wooden door. "No," Rhea called out firmly. "Go to bed, Bramble." The whining intensified, punctuated by increasingly frantic scratching. Rhea pulled her pillow over her head, trying to block out the sound, but it was impossible to ignore. After 15 minutes of escalating distress, she heard her father's heavy footsteps in the hallway. "Everything okay up here?" Holden's voice carried through the door. Rhea got up and opened it, finding her father in his robe, looking concerned. Bramble immediately pressed against her legs, his whole body trembling. "I tried to make him sleep somewhere else," she explained, frustration evident in her voice. "But he's acting like I'm in mortal danger or something." Holden studied the dog thoughtfully. "Maybe we should have him sleep downstairs?" But even as he said it, Bramble's posture changed. His ears flattened, and that low growl returned, not threatening, but clearly communicating his refusal to leave his post. "Or not," Holden sighed. "Look, why don't you leave the door cracked open? Just for now, until he settles in better?" Rhea wanted to argue, to insist on normal boundaries, but exhaustion won out. "Fine," she conceded, "but something's not right with him, Dad. This isn't normal dog behavior." Back in bed, with the door slightly ajar, Rhea listened to Bramble's breathing even out as he resumed his position beneath the gap. Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, casting shifting shadows on the wall. She tried to convince herself that this was just an adjustment period, that Bramble would eventually relax and behave like a regular dog. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Bramble wasn't guarding her out of simple devotion or protective instinct. His behavior seemed driven by something deeper, something that made him stand sentinel against dangers only he could sense, waiting in the darkness beyond her door. The morning light filtered through Rhea's bedroom window, but she'd been awake for hours. Bramble's constant shifting and low whines throughout the night had made real rest impossible. She watched as he paced between her door and the hallway, his nails clicking against the wooden floor in an endless rhythm. "Come on, boy," she said, trying to keep her voice light as she headed to the kitchen. "Time for breakfast." Bramble followed, but his attention remained divided. Every few steps, he'd glance back toward her bedroom, as if drawn by an invisible force. When Rhea reached for his food bowl, he didn't show the usual eagerness of a dog anticipating breakfast. She placed the bowl in its designated spot near the back door, but Bramble just stared at it, then looked toward the stairs leading back to her room. Frustrated, Rhea grabbed the bowl and carried it upstairs, setting it next to her doorway. Only then did Bramble begin to eat, though his movements were jerky and distracted. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, watching him gulp down his food while maintaining his guard position. Holden appeared in the hallway, already dressed for ranch work. "Still having trouble with our watchdog, huh?" "Dad, this isn't normal," Rhea insisted, gesturing to Bramble. "He won't eat unless it's by my door. He barely sleeps. He's acting like there's something wrong." Her father's expression softened with concern, but she could see he wasn't taking her worries seriously enough. "Honey, he's protective. That's what good dogs do." "This is more than protective," Rhea argued. "It's obsessive. Yesterday I couldn't even go to the bathroom without him pressing against the door the whole time." Holden ran a hand through his graying hair. "Give him time. He's probably never had someone to look after before. The shelter said he was a stray for years." Rhea felt a familiar frustration building. The same feeling she'd had when people dismissed her concerns about her ex-boyfriend's controlling behavior in the early days. "Dad, I know what normal dog behavior looks like. This isn't it." Throughout the day, Bramble's behavior only intensified. When Rhea tried to do laundry, he insisted on checking the empty basement before letting her descend the stairs. While she worked on her laptop in the living room, he positioned himself between her and every entrance, his head constantly swiveling to monitor the windows and doors. The breaking point came that evening. Rhea was heading to the bathroom when Bramble suddenly lunged forward, nearly knocking her off her feet as he wedged himself between her and the dark hallway. His body was rigid, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "That's it!" Rhea steadied herself against the wall, her heart pounding. "Dad, we need to talk about Bramble." Holden appeared from his study, alarm evident on his weathered face. "What happened?" "He almost knocked me down," Rhea explained, her voice shaking. "I can't live like this. Maybe we should take him back to the shelter." The moment the words left her mouth, Bramble's demeanor changed. The voice growling stopped, and he turned to her with such a profound look of betrayal that Rhea felt her chest tighten despite her anger. "Now, hold on," Holden said, his tone gentle but firm. "Let's not make any hasty decisions. He's trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Rhea demanded. "There's nothing here. We're in the middle of nowhere, Dad. The most dangerous thing around is probably the tractor." Her voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly she wasn't just talking about Bramble anymore. The memories of her ex-boyfriend's protective behavior, checking her phone, monitoring her friendships, controlling her schedule, came flooding back. "I can't do this again," she whispered, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "I can't have something else in my life that's controlling me." Holden crossed the hallway and sat beside her, careful to give her space. Bramble remained standing, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond them, but his ears were turned back, listening. "Rhea," her father said quietly, "I know you've been through hell, and I know it's not easy to trust right now, but Bramble's not trying to control you. He's trying to guard you. There's a difference." "Is there?" She looked at the dog's tense posture, his vigilant stance. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels an awful lot like being trapped again." "The difference," Holden continued, "is that Bramble would die to protect you, not to possess you. Whatever he's doing, whatever he's sensing, it's not about control. It's about keeping you safe." Rhea wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. "But safe from what, Dad? There's nothing here." As if in response to her words, Bramble's head snapped toward the window at the end of the hall. His growl returned, deeper this time, and the hair along his spine rose in a rigid line. "See?" Rhea gestured helplessly. "This is what I mean. He's acting like there's some kind of monster out there, and it's making me crazy." Holden stood slowly, his knees cracking. "Tell you what, let's give it one more week. If he's still this intense, we'll look into other options. Maybe a trainer or—" "Fine," Rhea conceded, too tired to argue further. "1 week. But something has to change, Dad. I can't keep living with a guard dog who thinks every shadow is out to get me." Later that night, as Rhea prepared for bed, she could feel the familiar tension building in Bramble's body. He took up his position at the partially open door, his eyes reflecting the dim hallway light like amber coins. Every few minutes, his ears would twitch at some sound she couldn't hear, and his muscles would tense beneath his golden fur. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Rhea wondered if she was being fair to the dog. Maybe her father was right. Maybe this was just Bramble's way of showing loyalty. But as she listened to his restless movements and occasional low growls, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his behavior, something that went beyond simple protective instinct. The moon cast shifting shadows through her window, and Bramble's silhouette remained a constant presence in the doorway. His vigilance was both a comfort and a source of unease, leaving Raya torn between gratitude for his dedication and fear of what might be driving it. The deep silence of midnight wrapped around the ranch house like a heavy blanket. Only the gentle hum of crickets and the occasional distant coyote cry broke through the darkness. Rhea had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, with Bramble maintaining his usual post at her door. The sudden explosion of savage barking shattered the peace like a gunshot. Rhea bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't Bramble's usual alert growling. This was different. Violent. Desperate. The sound of his nails scrabbling against the wooden floor echoed through the hallway as he tore away from his post. "Bramble?" she called out, her voice trembling. The only response was a tremendous thud that shook the entire house, followed by another and another. Rhea scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over her blankets in her haste. In the hallway, she almost collided with her father, who was already moving towards the sound with his flashlight in hand. "What in heaven's name?" Holden muttered, leading the way to the front of the house. They found Bramble hurling himself at the front door with frightening force. His shoulder slammed into the solid wood again and again, each impact punctuated by frenzied barking that seemed to come from deep in his chest. Blood streaked the white paint where his repeated collisions had split the skin above his eye. "Bramble, stop!" Rhea cried out, horrified by the sight of blood. "You're hurting yourself!" But the dog seemed beyond hearing. His eyes were wild, focused on something beyond the door that neither of them could see. His teeth were bared in a snarl that transformed his usually gentle face into something fierce and primitive. Holden stepped forward carefully, speaking in low, steady tones. "Easy now, boy. Easy." He reached for Bramble's collar, but the dog twisted away, throwing himself at the door once more. "Dad, he's going to break his bones if he keeps this up," Rhea said, her voice cracking with worry. Despite her recent frustration with the dog, seeing him in such distress made her chest ache. Holden nodded grimly. "Stand back." He moved forward again, this time positioning himself between Bramble and the door. The dog tried to dodge around him, but Holden was ready. He caught Bramble's collar with both hands, using his body weight to guide the dog away from the door. "I've got him," he grunted. "Get the lights, all of them, and bring some paper towels for this blood." Rhea flipped every switch she could find, flooding the house and porch with light. When she returned with the paper towels, Bramble had stopped fighting against Holden's grip, but his body remained rigid, with tension. His eyes never left the door. "What do you think set him off?" Rhea asked, gently dabbing at the cut above Bramble's eye. The dog allowed her to clean the wound, though his muscles trembled beneath her touch. Holden's expression was troubled. "Don't know, but I've never seen him like this." He moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain to peer into the darkness. The security light cast harsh shadows across the yard, but nothing moved in its glare. They spent the next hour trying to calm Bramble, who gradually settled into an alert crouch by the door, refusing to leave his post. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and they retreated to their rooms, though none of them slept soundly for the remainder of the night. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, as if trying to erase the tension of the previous night. Rhea found her father already outside when she went to make coffee. He was standing on the porch, staring at something on the ground with an expression that made her stomach clench. "Dad." She stepped out to join him, Bramble pressing close against her leg. "What is it?" Holden pointed without speaking. There, in the soft earth beside the porch steps, was a set of fresh boot prints. They were deep and deliberate, leading up to the house before turning away again. "Maybe it was you?" Rhea suggested, her voice small. But she knew it wasn't true. These prints were much larger than her father's boots, and the pattern was unfamiliar. "Come with me," Holden said grimly. He led her to the wire gate that separated their yard from the pasture. Bramble followed, his body tense and alert. When they reached the gate, Holden knelt down and ran his fingers along the lower section of wire. Rhea's breath caught in her throat. The heavy gauge wire had been cut cleanly through, leaving a gap just large enough for someone to slip under. This wasn't the work of weather or wear. This was deliberate. "Someone tried to get in last night," she whispered, the reality of it hitting her like a physical blow. "That's what Bramble was trying to tell us." Holden straightened up, his jaw set in a hard line. "And they would have, if not for him." He looked down at the dog, who was scanning the horizon with unwavering focus. He wasn't being paranoid after all. They spent the rest of the morning securing the property. Holden fixed the gate and checked all the locks, while Rhea called the sheriff's office to report the incident. But even with all their precautions, an unsettling awareness had settled over the ranch. They were no longer as isolated as they had thought. Bramble refused to leave Rhea's side all day, pacing restlessly whenever she stopped moving. His protective behavior, which had seemed intrusive before, now felt like a lifeline. Every few minutes, he would pause and listen intently, as if hearing something beyond human perception. By late afternoon, Holden had reached a decision. He found Rhea in the kitchen, where she was stress baking her grandmother's cookie recipe. "This isn't just dog anxiety," he said without preamble. "Bramble's been trying to warn us from the start. We just weren't listening." Rhea set down her mixing bowl, flour dusting her trembling hands. "I feel horrible for doubting him. All this time he knew something was wrong, and I just wanted to send him away." "Don't beat yourself up," Holden said softly. "We couldn't have known. But now we do, and things are going to change around here." As if in agreement, Bramble pressed his head against Rhea's leg, his eyes fixed on the window with unwavering vigilance. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, a lonely sound that seemed to carry a warning all its own. The morning after discovering the cut fence, Holden insisted on taking Bramble to the veterinarian. "Just to check that cut above his eye," he explained to Rhea, though they both knew it was more than that. The injury from hitting the door hadn't been serious, but Bramble's behavior had them worried. The veterinary clinic sat on the outskirts of town, a weathered building with a fresh coat of pale blue paint trying to brighten its aging exterior. Inside, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo. A bell chimed as they entered, and Bramble pressed close to Holden's leg, his usual confidence somewhat diminished in the clinical setting. Dr. Rowan Kell emerged from an examination room, his tired eyes brightening with professional interest as he spotted them. "Holden," he said warmly, extending his hand. "It's been a while. And who do we have here?" "This is Bramble," Holden explained, giving the dog a reassuring pat. "Got him from the county shelter about a week ago. Had a bit of an incident last night. Slammed himself into our front door pretty hard." Rowan knelt down slowly, allowing Bramble to catch his scent. The dog remained cautious but didn't shy away. "Let's take a look at him," the vet said, leading them into an examination room. "Any other concerns besides the cut?" Holden hesitated. "Well, he's been acting strange. Real protective, especially at night. Won't leave my daughter's bedroom door." The examination started routinely enough. Rowan checked Bramble's eyes, ears, and the superficial cut on his forehead. His movements were gentle and practiced, speaking softly to the dog throughout. But when he began palpating Bramble's ribcage, Something changed in his expression. He murmured, fingers probing more carefully. There's some unusual scarring here. He reached for a handheld scanner, running it slowly over Bramble's side. The device beeped, and Rowan's face went pale. "What is it?" Holden asked, noting the change in the vet's demeanor. Rowan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a cabinet and retrieved a larger imaging device. "I need to do a more detailed scan," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Would you mind holding him still?" As the scanner passed over Bramble's body, images appeared on a nearby screen. Rowan's hands were steady, but his jaw was clenched tight. When he finished, he stood staring at the results for a long moment. "These are shotgun pellets," he finally said, pointing to several small, bright spots scattered through the tissue around Bramble's ribs. Old ones, embedded deep. He was shot at close range, probably years ago. His voice had taken on a strange, distant quality. Holden leaned closer to the screen. "My God, the shelter didn't mention anything about this." "They probably didn't know," Rowan said, still staring at the images. His hands were gripping the edge of the examination table now. "The fur would have hidden the scarring, and without a scan—" He trailed off, then suddenly turned to face Holden. "You said you got him from the county shelter? When exactly?" "About a week ago. Why?" Rowan ran a hand through his hair, his professional composure cracking slightly. "Do you have the paperwork from the shelter? Any information about where he came from before that?" "Just the standard adoption forms. They said he was a stray, picked up on the north side of the county." Holden was watching the vet carefully now. "Dr. Kell, what's bothering you about this?" Rowan seemed to be fighting some internal battle. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I've seen injuries like this before," he said quietly. "A long time ago. A case that—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I need to look into something. Would it be possible for me to speak with your daughter? Soon?" "Rhea? Why?" "I can't say for certain yet," Rowan replied, his voice strained. "But if I'm right about this—" He looked down at Bramble, who was watching him with steady eyes. "Just please, have her come see me, as soon as possible." The examination concluded with Rowan cleaning and bandaging the cut above Bramble's eye. But his movements were mechanical now, his mind clearly elsewhere. As he wrote up the visit notes, his hand paused several times, and Holden could see him struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "The cut will heal fine," Rowan said as they prepared to leave. "But Holden—" He hesitated again, choosing his words carefully. "Keep a close eye on things at home, and tell Rhea I need to speak with her, tomorrow, if she can." As they walked out to the truck, Bramble seemed more alert than ever, scanning their surroundings with renewed intensity. Holden helped him into the cab, then sat for a moment without starting the engine, thinking about the fear he'd seen in Dr. Kell's eyes when he'd discovered those metal fragments. Something about those old wounds had shaken the vet deeply, and whatever it was, it had something to do with Rhea. Something urgent enough to crack the professional calm of a man known for his steady nerves. The drive home was silent except for Bramble's soft whining, a sound that seemed to carry a new weight of meaning after what they'd learned. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch house's front porch as Dr. Rowan Kell's truck pulled up the gravel driveway. Rhea watched from the kitchen window, drying her hands on a dish towel. Bramble sat alert at her feet, his eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle. "That must be Dr. Kell," Holden said, setting down his coffee mug. "I'll go meet him." Rhea nodded, trying to quell her growing unease. Her father had been oddly quiet since returning from the vet yesterday, and now this urgent visit. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. Through the window, she watched Holden greet Rowan. The veterinarian looked different outside his clinic. More tense, almost haunted. He carried a worn leather briefcase, clutching it like a shield. Bramble's tail thumped once against the floor as the men approached, but he didn't move from his position beside Rhea. The screen door creaked open, and Holden led Rowan into the kitchen. "Rhea, this is Dr. Kell," Holden said. "He needed to speak with you about Bramble." Rowan stepped forward, extending his hand. "Please, call me Rowan. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." His handshake was firm, but slightly trembling. Up close, Rhea could see the dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept. "Of course," she replied. "Dad said you found something concerning during Bramble's examination?" Rowan glanced at the dog, then back to Rhea. "Yes, but would it be possible to see where Bramble's been spending his nights? Your father mentioned something about him guarding your bedroom door." The request seemed odd, but Rhea nodded. "This way." She led them down the hallway, Bramble padding silently beside her. As they approached her bedroom, Rowan's steps began to slow. His breathing became audible, and his face drained of color. "The layout," he whispered, more to himself than to them. "It's almost exactly—" He stopped abruptly, pressing one hand against the wall to steady himself. Bramble watched him intently, ears forward. "Dr. Kell?" Holden stepped closer, concerned. "Are you all right?" Rowan shook his head, fumbling to open his briefcase with shaking hands. "I need to show you something." He pulled out a manila folder, yellowed with age. 11 years ago, there was a home invasion about 40 miles from here, the Mitchell Ranch. Rhea felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered hearing about it. Everyone in the county had. A 12-year-old girl had been killed. "The family had a dog," Rowan continued, his voice rough. "A young golden retriever. When the intruder broke in, the dog tried to protect them. He took a shotgun blast to the ribs, but he kept fighting." He pulled out a photograph, holding it carefully. "The dog disappeared that night, after the police arrived. We searched for weeks, but never found him." Rhea stared at the photograph. A younger, healthier Bramble looked back at her, sitting proudly next to a smiling girl with pigtails. "Yesterday, when I found those shotgun pellets." Rowan's voice cracked. "I knew. I'd treated those same wounds that night. I've never forgotten that dog's eyes, that desperate need to protect." He gestured to Bramble, who hadn't moved from Rhea's side. "He's doing exactly what he did then, standing guard, trying to prevent history from repeating itself." The hallway seemed to close in around them. Rhea looked down at Bramble, seeing him with new eyes. All those nights at her door, the constant vigilance, the way he positioned himself between her and any perceived threat. It wasn't just strange behavior. It was trauma, purpose, memory. "The case was never solved," Rowan said quietly. "The intruder escaped, and Sarah Mitchell's murder remains open. But Bramble—" He knelt down, reaching out to the dog with a trembling hand. He never stopped being that guardian, all these years carrying those wounds, and now he's found someone else to protect. Bramble allowed Rowan's touch, but his eyes stayed fixed on Rhea. The weight of his gaze felt different now, not unsettling, but heartbreaking. How long had he wandered, carrying the memory of that terrible night? "I failed him back then," Rowan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We all did. We couldn't find him, couldn't help him heal, and now he's here, still trying to make sure it doesn't happen again." Rhea sank to her knees beside Bramble, wrapping her arms around his neck. He leaned into her, solid and warm, the same quiet strength that had been watching over her every night. She could feel the subtle ridges of scar tissue beneath his fur, physical reminders of his sacrifice. "All this time," she murmured. "You've been trying to tell us, haven't you?" Holden cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "No wonder he wouldn't leave your door. He knows what can happen in the dark." Rowan wiped his eyes, trying to regain his composure. "When your father told me about his behavior, about the footprints you found, I had to come. The similarities were too strong to ignore. Bramble remembers more than just that night. He remembers what signs to watch for." The revelation hung heavy in the hallway. Rhea stroked Bramble's head, thinking about all the nights she'd been annoyed by his presence, wishing he would just sleep somewhere else. Now she understood the desperation in his vigilance, the weight of memory and purpose that drove him to stand guard. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at Rowan. The veterinarian straightened, gathering the scattered papers back into his briefcase. "Now we listen to what he's been trying to tell us. Bramble wasn't just being difficult or anxious. He was warning you. Whatever he sensed that night, whatever made him react so strongly, it wasn't nothing." Bramble's ears twitched, and he turned his head toward the front of the house, alert but not alarmed. The morning sun had risen higher, pushing back the shadows in the hallway, but Rhea could still feel the echo of that long-ago night in Bramble's steadfast presence beside her. She looked at the old photograph one more time before Rowan put it away. The happy, unscarred dog and the smiling girl who had no idea what was coming. Bramble hadn't been able to save her, but he'd never stopped trying to prevent it from happening again. "Thank you," Rhea said to Rowan, "for remembering him, for helping us understand." Rowan nodded, his professional demeanor slowly returning, though his eyes remained haunted. "Just be careful. All of you. Bramble's instincts were right once before. We should pay attention to them now." The afternoon sun filtered through the shelter office windows as Rhea and Rowan hunched over scattered papers and a glowing computer screen. Bramble lay at their feet, his chin resting on Rhea's shoe, ever watchful. "Here's the intake record from when your father found him," Rowan said, sliding a form across the desk. "Standard stray protocol, basic health check, estimated age." His fingers traced down the page. "But look at this. They found a damaged microchip during processing." Rhea leaned closer. "Damaged how?" "Shotgun pellets." Rowan's voice was tight. "The same ones I found yesterday. They fragmented the chip, but there were still readable pieces." He turned to the computer, pulling up a database. "I called in some favors this morning, got access to the National Registry. The partial numbers match a dog registered to the Halloran family." The name hung in the air between them. Rhea watched Bramble, thinking about all he'd survived. "So there's no doubt? He's really their dog?" "None." Rowan pulled out another file, this one worn with age. "I kept copies of everything from that night. The injury pattern is identical, right down to the scatter angle of the pellets." He paused, swallowing hard. "I've replayed that night in my head for 11 years, wondering if I could have done more, searched harder." Rhea placed her hand on his arm. "You couldn't have known." "No, but..." He straightened, pulling up another window on the computer. "What matters now is understanding why he's so agitated, why your hallway triggers such a strong response." His fingers moved across the keyboard. "The man who broke in that night, Royce Banyan, he was only convicted of burglary. The prosecution couldn't prove he fired the shot that..." He stopped, unable to finish. "What?" Rhea felt her stomach twist. "How is that possible?" "The weapon was never found. The evidence was circumstantial. He claimed there was someone else with him, but never named names." Rowan's voice grew harder. "He got 15 years for armed burglary. And now, the screen showed a Department of Corrections record. Rhea read the release date and felt her blood run cold. 3 months ago. I should have checked sooner when your father first brought Bramble in. Rowan ran a hand through his hair. The timing, it can't be coincidence. Rhea thought about the cut fence, the footprints. There's been a truck, she said slowly. Dark blue, older model. I've seen it parked along our fence line a few times this week. Always idles for a while, then drives off when someone comes outside. Rowan's head snapped up. When was the last time? Yesterday morning. I was heading to the barn and heard an engine cut off. By the time I looked, they were gone. She wrapped her arms around herself. I thought it was just someone lost or checking fence lines. Like Bramble's behavior? Rowan's voice was gentle. Easy to dismiss until you know the whole story? Rhea nodded, feeling slightly sick. Bramble pressed against her leg, solid and reassuring. She reached down to touch his head, finding comfort in his unwavering presence. Royce Banyan was convinced the Hallorans had money hidden in their house, Rowan continued, pulling out more papers. He tore the place apart looking for it. The police think that's why things escalated. When he couldn't find what he wanted, he trailed off, then squared his shoulders. His parole conditions should keep him counties away from here. The fact that he might be circling this area. You think he's still looking? Rhea asked. After all this time? Men like that. Rowan shook his head. They fixate. 11 years in prison probably convinced himself that money is still out there somewhere, and now there's a new family, in a similar isolated location. Rhea thought about her bedroom hallway, so like the one where Sarah Halloran died. About Bramble's desperate vigil at her door, about the sound of engines in the dark. We should call the police, she said. We will. Rowan gathered the papers into a neat stack. But Rhea, they'll need more than a similar dog and a suspicious truck. Banyan's smart. He wouldn't have survived this long if he wasn't. If he is watching the ranch. He's being careful, she finished. The weight of understanding settled over her. Every night Bramble spent guarding her door. He wasn't just reliving trauma. He was recognizing genuine danger. Rowan picked up his phone. I'll contact his parole officer, alert the local sheriff, but until we have concrete proof he's violating his conditions. He met her eyes. Don't dismiss anything that feels wrong. And don't discount Bramble's instincts. He remembers what Banyan looks like, sounds like, smells like. If he's reacting to something. There's a reason, Rhea said quietly. She looked down at Bramble, who gazed back with those knowing eyes. All this time, he'd been trying to warn them, using the only language he had. They spent another hour documenting everything. The fence damage, the footprints, the truck sightings. With each detail logged, the pattern became clearer, more ominous. Rhea felt her skin prickle as she described the engine sounds in the dark, the sense of being watched. When they finally left the shelter office, the sun was lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Bramble moved closer to Rhea's side, his body alert, but not tense. I'll follow you home, Rowan said, his voice brooking no argument. And Rhea? Maybe it's time to let Bramble sleep in your room, not just outside it. She nodded, understanding now why the dog had been so insistent. He wasn't trying to control her movements or invade her space. He was standing guard against a ghost that might not be a ghost after all. As they drove home, Rhea watched the rearview mirror, noting every vehicle, every turn. Bramble sat in the back seat, his eyes fixed forward, ready as always to face whatever waited in the gathering dark. The familiar fear of being watched, of being controlled, still lingered. But now it had a focus, a name, a reason, and she wasn't facing it alone. Whatever Royce Banyan's fixation had driven him to do, whatever he might be planning, he hadn't counted on a dog with a long memory and an unfinished purpose. Rhea glanced at Bramble in the mirror. "We're going to be ready this time, aren't we, boy?" His tail thumped once against the seat. In the growing dusk, his eyes held the same steady promise they always had. No one would pass that doorway uninvited. Not again. The evening sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Rhea stood in her bedroom doorway, watching Rowan examine the old lock. His fingers traced the worn metal thoughtfully. "This wouldn't hold against a determined push," he said, shaking his head. "We should replace all the exterior locks, maybe add deadbolts." Rhea squared her shoulders. The familiar urge to retreat, to find somewhere safer, whispered in the back of her mind. But she pushed it away. "Then let's replace them. All of them." Bramble sat at attention beside her, his golden coat catching the fading light. He hadn't left her side since they'd returned from the shelter, maintaining his protective vigil with renewed purpose. "I'll make a list," Rowan said, pulling out his phone. "Hardware store's still open. We can start tonight." Holden appeared in the hallway, his weathered face set with determination. "I've got some tools in the barn. Might as well do this right." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. They drove into town, loading up on heavy-duty locks, reinforced strike plates, and longer screws. Rowan insisted on door viewers for every entrance, explaining how they'd help spot anyone trying to approach unannounced. As they worked, Rhea felt her resolve strengthening. Each turn of the screwdriver, each solid thunk of new hardware settling into place, felt like taking back control. "Dad," she said, watching him test a fresh deadbolt. I think it's time I started practicing again." Holden's hand stilled. He knew exactly what she meant. Growing up on the ranch, she'd learned firearm safety early, but she'd left that knowledge behind with everything else when she'd moved to the city. "You sure about that, sweetheart?" Rhea nodded. "I need to be ready. For everything." The next morning found them at the far end of the property, where years ago they'd set up targets against the hillside. Holden walked her through the basics again, his voice patient and steady. "Remember, respect the weapon. Always treat it as if it's loaded." He demonstrated proper stance, proper grip. "Take your time. Breathe." Bramble watched from nearby, alert but calm. It was as if he understood this too was part of protecting the household. Rhea's first few shots went wide, but muscle memory slowly returned. By the end of the hour, she was hitting the target consistently. Not perfect, but better. "Good," Holden said. "We'll practice more tomorrow." Back at the house, Rowan arrived with troubling news. He'd been digging through public records, tracking Royce Banyan's movements since his release. "His parole address," Rowan said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "It's just a post office box, right here in town." Rhea felt her stomach clench. "How is that even allowed?" "It shouldn't be." Rowan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I called the sheriff's office again. They said without direct evidence of a violation." "They won't do anything," Rhea finished. The familiar weight of institutional dismissal settled over her, but this time it fueled her determination rather than her fear. Throughout the day, they continued strengthening the ranch's defenses. New motion sensor lights went up around the perimeter. Holden repaired weak spots in the fencing, while Rhea and Rowan installed additional locks on the windows. Bramble followed Rhea everywhere, his vigilance never wavering. When a car drove past the property, he went rigid, tracking its movement until the sound faded. His reaction confirmed what they all suspected. He remembered more than just the layout of a hallway. "He's our early warning system," Rowan observed, watching the dog's behavior. "If Banyan comes near..." Bramble will know, Rhea said. She'd stopped doubting the dog's instincts. His protective nature wasn't suffocating anymore. It was reassuring. That evening, they gathered in the kitchen, reviewing their security improvements. Rhea traced her finger along a rough map of the property, marking the new lights, the reinforced entries. I know it seems like a lot, Rowan said, noting her thoughtful expression. But being prepared isn't the same as living in fear. I understand that now, Rhea replied. Before, with... She paused, thinking of her ex, of how his control had masked itself as protection. This is different. This is choosing to be strong. Holden reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You've always been strong, sweetheart. Sometimes we just need reminding. As night settled over the ranch, Rhea stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the darkened landscape. Bramble sat beside her, a steady presence in the quiet room. The new locks gleamed on her door. The reinforced windows felt solid and sure. She thought about Royce Banyan, about his obsession with hidden money, about the violence he'd brought to another family on another night. The fear was still there, but it didn't control her anymore. She had prepared as best she could. She had support, she had knowledge, and she had a guardian who wouldn't let history repeat itself. Rhea knelt beside Bramble, running her hand along his golden fur. We're ready, she whispered. Whatever comes, we're ready. His eyes met hers, deep and knowing. She no longer saw his doorway vigils as a sign of trauma, but as a promise, one he intended to keep. Together they would face whatever darkness approached, not as victims, but as defenders. The ranch settled into its nighttime quiet, but it wasn't the silence of vulnerability anymore. It was the calm of readiness, of strength gathered and preserved, waiting to meet whatever challenge might come. The afternoon light dimmed as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, rolling in like a heavy blanket across the sky. Rhea watched from the kitchen window as the weather shifted, transforming the peaceful ranch into something more ominous. Next to her, Bramble paced back and forth, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Easy, boy, she murmured, but the dog's agitation only seemed to grow. His ears twitched at every gust of wind, and his usual calm demeanor had given way to restless movement. Holden stepped in from the porch, his weathered face creased with concern. Storm's coming in fast. Might be a big one. As if confirming his words, thunder rumbled in the distance. Bramble's head snapped up, a low whine escaping his throat. I've never seen him this worked up over weather before, Rhea said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. But Bramble pulled away, moving to the hallway where he began scratching at her bedroom door. Rowan, who had stayed to help with final security checks, watched the dog's behavior with growing unease. Animals can sense things we can't, he said quietly, especially dogs with his history. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the trees and rattling the windows. The storm clouds had completely overtaken the sky now, turning afternoon into an early twilight. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ranch in stark white bursts. Bramble's scratching became more intense. His claws left marks on the paint as he alternated between pawing at the door and turning to growl at the darkened hallway. Should we? Rhea began, but her words were cut off by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the house into darkness. Don't move, Holden's voice came through the darkness. I've got flashlights in the kitchen drawer. They heard him moving carefully through the familiar space. Rhea felt Bramble press against her legs, his body rigid with tension. Another flash of lightning revealed his face, ears flat against his head, teeth bared at something only he could sense. Holden returned with 3 flashlights, passing them out. The beams cut through the darkness, creating moving shadows that made everything feel more uncertain. "The backup generator should kick in," he said. But after several minutes of waiting, they remained in darkness. "Something's wrong with it," Rhea realized. "Dad, didn't you check it last week?" "I did." Holden's voice was grim. "It was working fine." Rowan moved to the window, shining his light outside. The rain had started now, coming down in heavy sheets that reduced visibility to mere feet. "Phone service?" Rhea checked her cell phone, but the screen showed no signal. The landline, when tested, was equally dead. "The storm must have knocked out the lines," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she believed them. They had weathered plenty of storms before without losing all communication. Bramble's growling grew louder, more insistent. He moved between Rhea and the hallway, his posture defensive. When lightning flashed again, they caught glimpses of movement outside. Quick, darting shadows that might have been tree branches in the wind, or something else entirely. "We need to check the doors," Rowan said, keeping his voice steady despite the tension. "All of them. Now." They moved through the house as a group, checking locks and windows. The storm's fury increased with each passing minute, wind hammering against the walls with enough force to make the house creak and groan. Rhea's flashlight beam caught something through the living room window, a brief glimpse of movement that wasn't rain or wind-blown debris. Bramble saw it too, lunging at the window with a bark that made them all jump. "Did you see?" she started to ask, but Bramble was already racing to the back of the house, his nails scrambling on the floor as he rounded the corner. They followed, hearts pounding. The dog stood at the back door, alternating between fierce barking and those same distressed whines they'd heard earlier. Lightning illuminated the back porch in strobing flashes, and for a moment, Rhea thought she saw a shadow move across it, too solid to be cast by the storm. "We're not alone out here," Rowan said quietly, placing a protective hand on Rhea's shoulder. "The storm isn't a coincidence." Holden checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. "Rhea, get your gun. We'll set up in the living room. Better sight lines." They moved as one unit back through the dark house, Bramble never more than a step from Rhea's side. The dog's behavior had evolved from agitated to frantic. He would rush to one window, then another, tracking something they couldn't see through the storm's fury. Thunder shook the house again, and in the brief silence that followed, they heard it. The distinct sound of footsteps on the front porch, barely audible over the rain. Bramble's growl turned deeper, more threatening than they'd ever heard from him. He positioned himself between Rhea and the front door, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. The storm had effectively cut them off from the outside world. No phones, no power, no way to call for help. Through the windows, the rain created a shifting curtain that could hide any number of approaching threats. Each flash of lightning brought new shadows, new movements to track, new reasons for Bramble's growing distress. They gathered in the living room, backs to the wall, weapons ready. Rhea's hands were steady on her gun, but her heart raced. The storm's isolation pressed in around them, making the house feel smaller, more vulnerable despite all their preparations. "Whatever happens," Holden said softly, "we stay together." Bramble's head snapped toward the kitchen, then back to the hallway, then to the front door. Tracking movement they couldn't see, but movement he was certain was there. His earlier whines had given way to a constant low growl, a sound of warning and protection that cut through the storm's chaos. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief, brilliant moment, they all saw it. A face at the window, there and gone so quickly they might have doubted it if not for Bramble's immediate reaction. The dog launched himself at the window with such force that the glass rattled in its frame, his barks now full of fury and recognition. The storm raged on, trapping them in their dark fortress, while outside, something or someone waited, using the weather's cover to move closer, testing their defenses, searching for a way in. They could only watch, wait, and trust in Bramble's instincts to warn them where the threat would come from next. The shattering of glass pierced through the storm's howl, sending razor-sharp shards spraying across the kitchen floor. Without hesitation, Holden moved toward the sound, his rifle raised. "Stay back," he called out to Rhea and Rowan. A dark figure emerged from the rain-soaked darkness, moving with predatory grace. Before Holden could squeeze the trigger, something hard struck his head with devastating force. The rifle clattered to the ground as he crumpled, blood streaming from a gash above his temple. "Dad!" Rhea's scream echoed through the house. Lightning illuminated Royce Banion's face as he stepped into the hallway. Water dripped from his clothes, but his movements were deliberate and controlled. In one hand, he gripped a hunting knife. In the other, a stolen handgun glinted in the darkness. "Remember me?" His voice was cold, calculating. "Took me a while to track down what I came for." Bramble launched himself down the hallway without warning, a golden blur of fury and protective instinct. Royce swung the gun toward Rhea, but Bramble's jaws were already reaching for his arm. The gunshot exploded in the confined space, deafening them all. Bramble yelped, his momentum carrying him forward before he collapsed, red spreading across his golden fur. But even as he bled, the old dog dragged himself back toward Rhea's position, leaving a dark trail on the wooden floor. His body trembled with each movement, yet his determination never wavered. He would guard her door one last time. "No, no, please," Rhea whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched Bramble's desperate crawl. Rowan moved to help Holden, but Royce's gun swung toward him. "Don't even think about it," Royce snarled. Rhea seized her chance. While Royce was focused on Rowan, she grabbed her father's arms and pulled with all her strength, dragging him backward toward her bedroom. Holden was heavy, barely conscious, but adrenaline gave her the power she needed. Bramble had reached his position by her door, his breathing labored but his eyes alert, fixed on the approaching threat. He wouldn't move, wouldn't yield this ground. Not again. "Inside, now," Rhea urged Rowan, who helped her get Holden through the doorway. They slammed it shut just as Royce's footsteps started down the hall, slow and deliberate. Rhea's hands shook as she threw the lock and pushed her dresser against the door. Outside, she could hear Bramble's labored breathing, could picture him lying there, still protecting them even as his life ebbed away. "You can't hide in there forever," Royce called out, his voice closer now. "That dog couldn't stop me then, and he can't stop me now." Thunder crashed overhead as Rhea pressed her back against the barricaded door, her father's blood on her hands, and Bramble's sacrifice heavy on her heart. In the darkness of the storm-racked night, survival became their only focus, while Royce's footsteps drew ever nearer. Through the gap beneath the door, Rhea could see Bramble's shadow, still maintaining his vigil despite his wounds. The faithful dog's presence was both a comfort and a heartbreak as they listened to Royce's methodical approach through the darkness. The darkness pressed in around Rhea as she tried to control her rapid breathing. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clearing, accessing memories she thought she'd left behind. Years of her father's patient instruction flooded back: proper stance, trigger discipline, staying calm under pressure. She could almost hear Holden's steady voice guiding her through each step. "Last chance," Royce called through the door, the metallic click of his reloading gun cutting through the storm's fury. "Open up now, and maybe I won't have to hurt anyone else." Beside her, Holden stirred weakly on the floor where Rowan had helped lay him, blood matting his gray hair. The sight strengthened her resolve. She wouldn't let Royce hurt anyone else she loved. Ria's fingers found her phone in the darkness, quickly dialing Rowan's number. She kept her voice barely above a whisper. "Rowan, we need help. Follow Bramble's barking. He'll guide you in." Through the phone, she heard Rowan's truck engine roaring over the storm. "I'm coming. Just hold on." Outside the door, Bramble let out a series of weak, determined barks. Each one seemed to cost him tremendous effort, but he wouldn't stop. His loyalty pierced Ria's heart. She positioned herself carefully beside the door, remembering everything Holden had taught her about home. Defense. "Square your shoulders," his voice echoed in her memory. "Both eyes open. Breathe steady." The floorboards creaked as Royce shifted his weight. Ria counted his footsteps, timing her move. One chance, that's all she would get. With deliberate slowness, she eased the dresser back just enough. Her hands were steady now, wrapped around her father's old revolver. Thunder crashed overhead as she cracked the door open, using the sound as cover. Royce's shadow loomed in the hallway. Ria didn't hesitate. The gun kicked in her hands as she squeezed the trigger, the flash momentarily blinding in the darkness. Royce's howl of pain told her she'd hit her mark. He stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. His own weapon clattered to the floor, sliding several feet away across the wooden boards. Blood seeped between his fingers as he cursed. Bramble's barking grew stronger, more urgent, a beacon in the storm for Rowan to follow. Through the phone still pressed to her ear, Ria could hear the veterinarian's truck skidding on the muddy road, getting closer. "You shot me," Royce snarled, his voice thick with pain and fury. He began crawling toward his fallen gun, leaving a dark trail on the floor. "You're gonna regret that, girl." But Ria could see the weakness in his movements now. The predatory grace was gone, replaced by desperate scrambling. She'd changed the rules of his game, turned his certainty to chaos. "Stay where you are," she commanded, her voice stronger than she'd thought possible. The gun remained trained on his form as he inched toward his weapon. Through the phone, Rowan's voice crackled. "Almost there. The sheriff's right behind me. Don't let him get to that gun." Bramble's barking continued, each sound weaker than the last, but never stopping. The faithful dog giving everything he had left to guide, help to them through the storm-dark night. His dedication gave Ria strength as she faced down the wounded intruder, watching his every move while lightning flashed outside and thunder shook the walls of her childhood home. The front door burst open with a thunderous crash as Rowan charged in, wielding a wooden fence post he'd grabbed on his way through the yard. Rain dripped from his hair and clothes as he took in the scene in seconds, Royce crawling toward his fallen weapon, Ria holding her father's gun with unwavering determination. Without hesitation, Rowan swung the fence post, catching Royce across the shoulders just as his fingers brushed his gun. The impact drove Royce flat against the floor with a pained grunt. In one fluid motion, Rowan kicked the weapon far out of reach and pressed his knee into Royce's back, using the fence post to pin him down. "It's over," Rowan growled, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by cold fury. "Don't move." Red and blue lights finally began to flash through the windows as sheriff's deputies pulled up outside. Their boots thundered on the porch as they rushed in, weapons drawn. "In here!" Ria called out, lowering her father's gun as the officers swarmed the hallway. As deputies took control of Royce, Rowan immediately turned his attention to Bramble. The golden retriever lay in a growing pool of blood, still weakly trying to maintain his guard position. His eyes never left Ria, even as his strength faded. "We need to move fast," Rowan said, already assessing the wound. "The bullet went clean through his shoulder, but he's lost too much blood. Help me get him to the truck." Rhea didn't hesitate. She grabbed blankets from her room while Rowan carefully slid his arms under the injured dog. Together, they created a makeshift stretcher. "The paramedics are 5 minutes out for your father," a deputy assured Rhea as they passed. Holden had regained consciousness, gripping her hand briefly as they carried Bramble by. "Go," he whispered. "Save that brave dog." The storm still raged as they rushed outside. Rain pelted their faces while lightning split the sky. They worked quickly to secure Bramble in the truck bed, Rhea climbing in beside him to keep pressure on the wound. She wouldn't leave him, not after everything he'd done to protect her. "Hold on, boy," she murmured, cradling his head as Rowan drove through the darkness. "Just hold on." Bramble's tail thumped weakly against the truck bed, his eyes never leaving her face. Even now he was trying to comfort her. They reached Rowan's clinic in record time. He'd called ahead, and his assistant was waiting with the surgery room prepped. Together they carefully transferred Bramble onto a stretcher and rushed him inside. "I need blood products and fluid started immediately," Rowan ordered, his voice steady despite the urgency. He was already pulling on surgical gloves, his movements precise and focused. "Set up the monitoring equipment. Rhea, stay where he can see you. He'll be calmer that way." Rhea positioned herself near Bramble's head as the team worked around her. The old dog's eyes locked onto hers, filled with trust despite his pain. She stroked his ears gently, remembering how he'd positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation. "I won't lose him again," Rowan muttered, gathering his surgical instruments. His hands were rock steady as he prepared to operate, but his voice carried years of guilt and determination. "Not this time." Bramble's tail thumped once more against the table as the anesthesia began to take effect. His eyes slowly closed, but his face remained turned toward Rhea, faithful to the end, still trying to keep watch over her, even as consciousness slipped away. The weeks following the attack brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings and healing. Royce Banyan sat in county jail while forensics teams meticulously pieced together evidence, both old and new. The breakthrough came when they matched metal fragments from Bramble's old wounds to Royce's shotgun, the same weapon he'd used 11 years ago at the Halloran house. In the courthouse, Rowan's testimony proved pivotal. He stood at the witness stand, his voice steady as he detailed Bramble's injuries, both past and present. The shotgun pattern from 11 years ago matches exactly. This dog took a blast meant for another child, and then did the same thing again to protect Rhea Maris. The prosecution presented DNA evidence found on Royce's clothes, traces that linked back to the Halloran scene. The color drained from his face as the district attorney laid out the connections that had eluded investigators for so long. His prior burglary conviction transformed into multiple counts: attempted murder, animal cruelty, and finally, the first-degree murder of young Sarah Halloran. At the clinic, Bramble fought his own battle. The surgery lasted 4 hours, with Rowan working tirelessly to repair the damage. The bullet had torn through muscle and nicked an artery, but somehow missed vital organs. Day by day, the old dog's strength returned. His tail would wag whenever Rhea visited, even when he was too weak to lift his head. Holden recovered more quickly, though he needed a cane for several weeks. The attack left its mark in other ways. New security lights dotted the ranch's perimeter, and double locks reinforced every door. But there was healing there, too, in the quiet moments when father and daughter sat together on the porch, watching the sunset with Bramble resting at their feet. Rhea found herself drawn to the clinic more and more. At first, she came just to check on Bramble, but soon she was helping with other animals, too. Her steady hands proved perfect for calming nervous pets. and her attention to detail made her invaluable during treatments. "You have a gift for this," Rowan told her one afternoon as they changed Bramble's bandages together. The old dog lay calmly between them, trusting them completely. "I've never seen someone pick up the work so naturally." Rhea smiled, remembering how lost she'd felt just months ago. "It feels right," she admitted, "like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." The conviction came down in late autumn. Royce Banyan received life without parole. His decades of violence finally caught up with him. In the gallery, Rhea sat with Rowan, their shoulders touching lightly as the judge read the sentence. The weight of 11 years lifted from Rowan's shoulders as justice was finally served. "I always knew," he said quietly as they left the courthouse. "Knew that dog was trying to tell us something important. I just couldn't prove it back then." Bramble's recovery continued, slower than his younger days would have allowed, but steady nonetheless. His fur grew back over the surgery site, and though he still limped slightly in cold weather, his spirit remained undiminished. He no longer needed to guard Rhea's door at night. The danger had passed, transformed into memory by time and justice. The experience changed them all. Rhea discovered strength she never knew she had. Holden learned to show his worry more, openly. And Rowan, who had carried the weight of that long-ago failure for so many years, finally began to forgive himself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch as autumn settled in. Inside Rhea's room, Bramble lay stretched out on his favorite rug, his muzzle now touched with silver, but his eyes still bright and alert. The old wounds had healed, leaving only memories beneath his golden fur. Rhea moved about her room, hanging fresh curtains and humming softly. The bedroom door stood wide open to the hallway, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. She glanced at Bramble and smiled, remembering how he used to guard that threshold with such desperate intensity. "You don't have to watch the door anymore, old boy," she said softly. Bramble's tail thumped against the floor in response, his peaceful expression showing he understood. The danger had passed, and with it, the ghosts that had haunted them all. From the kitchen came the sounds of Holden and Rowan's voices, mixed with the clinking of coffee cups. Rowan's visits had become more frequent, evolving from checkups on Bramble to longer stays filled with easy conversation and shared moments. There was something tender growing between him and Rhea, unhurried and natural as the changing seasons. Holden watched this development with quiet satisfaction. He'd noticed how his daughter's eyes lit up whenever Rowan's truck appeared in the driveway, and how the veterinarian always seemed to find reasons to stop by, even long after Bramble's wounds had healed. "Those two," he muttered to Bramble one evening, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Reckon you knew what you were doing all along, didn't you?" Bramble's role had shifted from guardian to gentle companion. He no longer needed to stand between Rhea and danger. Instead, he'd become the bridge that helped connect three healing hearts. His presence reminded them that sometimes the deepest wounds could mend, given enough time and trust. The old dog dozed now, his breathing deep and even. For the first time since his arrival at the ranch, there was no tension in his body, no hidden vigilance. He had completed his long mission, bringing justice to an old crime while preventing history from repeating itself. Rhea sat down beside him, running her fingers through his soft fur. From the kitchen, she heard Rowan laugh at something her father said, and the sound made her smile. Their family had expanded in unexpected ways, drawn together by this remarkable dog who refused to give up his protective watch until all was truly well. Bramble shifted slightly in his sleep, sighing contentedly. The last rays of sunlight caught his fur, turning it to burnished gold. His paws twitched gently, not from nightmares now, but from sweet dreams of running through summer fields. He was finally, completely at peace. The evening settled around them like a warm blanket, full of the quiet sounds of home and safety. Tomorrow would bring another day of possibilities, of Ria's work at the clinic, of Rowan's gentle presence, of Holden's quiet strength. But for now, they simply existed in this moment of perfect contentment, watched over by a faithful guardian who could finally rest. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.